is the consumer. And what is the consumer thinking about new technologies, and what are the perceived benefits as well as the potential detriments that we have identified. So we want you to leave today's presentation in about 50 minutes with a really good grounding on what are consumers thinking about and what are the consumer-driven opportunities. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to share with you data from 3 different sources at GfK. The first source is called Consumer Life, which is an ongoing study of consumer trends. It's been conducted since the late 1990s in about 25 markets around the world. We're also going to share with you information from MRI, which is a very deep study of consumer attitudes and behaviors, media usage, product usage. And then we're also going to share information from our automobility study, which, as the name suggests, is really about the automotive category and looks at automotive intenders. And I think for everyone who has come to CES, probably one of the common denominators of everyone here is to understand what is the future going to bring, and more importantly, what is going to drive future growth. And we know for sure that what is going to drive future growth is going to be very, very different than what has been driving past growth. So for example, if we look at some of the products and the categories that have been the rock stars of the last decade, take for example the smartphone, what we're seeing is these products have really reached maturity and market saturation. So for example, in the United States, 220 million people have a smartphone. So this is a market that is pretty much tapped out. We're not going to see tremendous growth in the future in terms of smartphone adoption. But one area where we have seen pretty rapid adoption, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more, is in voice. And for sure, voice technologies have grown and gone beyond the early adopters and our mainstreaming, and have done this in a very short period of time. So today we have about a third of all Americans who say they have spoke to some type of virtual assistant in the past month. That might be something on their phone, that might be something in their home. But a third say they have spoke to a virtual assistant. The number is higher for millennials. It's higher for people who live in urban areas. It's higher for higher income consumers. And for sure, the United States is one of the markets that is leading this, but this is for sure not a US-driven phenomenon. We see that it is something that's mainstreaming here in the United States, as well as mainstreaming globally. And it's mainstreaming in both developed as well as developing economies. So take, for example, a market like India. When we look at online consumers in India, we see that they are even indexing higher than in the United States in terms of speaking, using voice in that market. So certainly something that has started to mainstream very, very quickly and is mainstreaming globally. Another area that we see a tipping point is in the smart home. About half of all Americans report that they have some type of smart home product or device in their home. That can be something like a thermometer or light, a security system. And when we look at the 50% who have a smart home device, the vast majority of them have more than one device. And I think this makes a lot of sense because when we see the growth in voice, when we see the growth in digital home assistants, one of the key areas what people are doing are using the smart home device or the digital virtual assistant to connect with other devices in their home. So this is something that about 6 out of 10 Americans who own a digital virtual assistant are doing on a weekly basis or more. So it is something that is really kind of bubbling up to the top in terms of how people are using these devices. We also see that people are using these devices right now in a very, very functional way. So it's doing things like, getting the weather, managing your calendar, but what really bubbles to the top is asking questions, right? And a couple of weeks ago, I have a 10-year-old daughter, and she called me Alexa. And I thought that really kind of told me where I sit in my family. But the ease in which someone can, use voice to ask a question, to ponder a question and get information, certainly also something that's very pervasive in terms of people who've engaged with the smart home technology. And voice is everywhere. So voice is going beyond, just kind of entertainment and the living room. It's moving to the kitchen, it's moving to the bedroom, it's really all over the house, and it's outside the house. Karen's going to talk a little bit more in a few moments about automotive. So we're seeing voice really become ubiquitous in consumers' lives today. And I think in some ways we're in a perfect storm of why this is happening now. For sure, it's about the technology, right? The technology enables this to happen. But one of the trends that we have been tracking in our study, both in the United States and globally, is the drive on the part of consumers for simplicity. And we're seeing reduced tolerance for anything that is complex or difficult to use. So this slide here shows the number of people who say, if a new technology product is not simple to use, I lose interest in it. And what is better than voice? That way in which to kind of connect in probably the simplest way, I think really fits into this trend we're seeing of this lack of interest in complexity. So for sure, voice is empowering consumers, but this trend of a drive towards simplicity is just important in helping fuel that adoption. And as a result, we're seeing a lot of examples in the marketplace right now that I think in the communication strategy are really speaking to this notion of the drive to simplicity and ease and complexity. So throughout today's presentation, Karen and I are going to share with you a few videos, and the first one happens to be an advertisement from Google, and I think it does a great job of tapping into this notion of simplicity.
Okay, Google, show me how to knead dough.
Sure, playing a video on YouTube.
Grasp the side of dough furthest away from you and fold.
Okay, Google, next step.
Leave the dough to rise for 30 minutes.
Help at a glance with Google Home Hub.
So really drives that notion of simplicity in terms of the messaging. This slide looks at where do we see the growth, where has the most rapid growth been happening, and where do we think future growth is going to continue. And for sure, up until this point in time, the growth of digital virtual assistants and smart home features has all been around cost saving, energy efficiency, so the ability to do home monitoring. So all of these things that the benefit to the consumer is a monetary saving one, a security one, really kind of come up to the top. But for sure, the one that has been growing the most is the ability to communicate between appliances. So this is the fastest growing benefit perceived on the part of consumers in terms of smart home technologies. We also see that the ability to monitor the home for people is super appealing. So this shows the number of consumers who are using either a smartphone or another device to be able to monitor their home remotely. So that also speaks to a benefit of security, which is really, really strong. So we've seen strong adoption in the security space. We've seen growth in that. And we think doing a little bit of a lean forward in terms of, well, where's going to growth be coming from? We do think there's an opportunity in more of the detection. So we're going to talk in a few points throughout this presentation kind of about proactive prevention and detection. And we do think this is one area that is poised for more growth in the smart home space. And this is based upon some of the general trends we see in terms of the marketplace. We have an overwhelming number of consumers, about 6 out of 10, who say they're very interested in reducing allergens in their home. We know that prevalence of allergies is on the rise. So being able to really monitor what is in the home, detect where there might be problems, this is very appealing to people. It's been increasing pretty dramatically in the last 6 or 7 years. So tapping into this idea of detection, I think, will be important. We also see that this doesn't just sit in the home space, it sits in other areas of consumers' lives. So take, for example, 4 out of 10 consumers across the globe are interested in automobiles that protect them from things such as pollutants, and other environmental threats. So we think there's an opportunity there, again, in detection, perhaps air purification. And then another number that I think is pretty profound is 6 out of 10 global consumers say they are worried about getting sick from either contaminated food or drink beverage. And we had in the United States just a couple weeks ago the big romaine lettuce scare. I think as we have more events that people reflect on and think about the food supply, this is becoming more top of mind, and indeed it's gone up 11 points since 2011. So detection, we think, is a really powerful opportunity in the space moving forward. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to turn it over to Karen, and she's going to talk about some of the opportunities that we're identifying in the mobility arena.
Thanks, Safi. Yes, so these insights come from the automobility study, and let me just say a little bit about that. We talk to 20,000 auto intenders every month, and it's a study that's been going on for the past 35 years. So it has the ability to trend backwards and give some insight moving forward, which is what we're going to focus on today. So while I think everyone knows that safety is the number one thing that people look for when they look for an automobile, anything that's smart and related to smart has been an increasingly important driver in the automotive to purchase decisions, which is terrific to hear here at the tech event that we're at. So obviously the majority are interested in the in-vehicle technology and also in the digital personal assistants that Kathy was talking about. So there's great opportunity there. Now, what are the smart tech things that rise to the top? Well, here on the page, they're in rank order. The top three are active safety systems, connected vehicle, and infotainment. And those are the ones that consumers are most familiar with. We've heard more about them. You can see the active safety here on the screen. The connected vehicle are things like the ability to have my digital phone, my digital products connect to the vehicle, as well as having Wi-Fi in the vehicle, kind of acting like a smart hub. And then the infotainment is what we are very familiar with, information and entertainment for both the driver and the passenger. And electric and autonomous are rather obvious. The augmented reality, you guys are probably familiar with, it's what's coming soon. And so about 30% of people are familiar with that and feel that it's important. And it is the ability to look at what's coming down the road on your dashboard screen before you actually get to it. And wellness solutions relate to some of the things that Kathy was just talking about. It includes things like driver drowsiness detection, air quality in the vehicle, but also it even goes so far as to be able to tell the driver about their blood glucose levels should they be diabetic. So those are fascinating new technologies. And of course, safety is paramount. It's also more automated than ever before. And across the US, it seems that people are not yet that comfortable with it. From the MRI data set, we know that 9 out of 10 Americans trust themselves to drive better than they trust an automotive vehicle. Now, that's because a lot of this is new, and if you've been following the news in Arizona, there were a bunch of people who attacked an autonomous vehicle, not quite understanding what was going on in that scenario. The people who are more educated about it are actually the auto intenders themselves. So you can see here, the study for automobility has a continuum going from 0, where the driver is in complete control of the vehicle, and about 70% of auto intenders want that, with varying levels of technology able to take over, till you get to the level 5, where it's a fully autonomous vehicle with no driver needed. And 30% of automotive intenders tell us they're interested in that. The intention is much higher among the younger set. No surprise there. They do tend to be more open to technology overall. But Gen X is just behind these Gen Y levels, so they're up in the majority as well. It's really the boomers and the older generations that are keeping the numbers low in the US. And from consumer life, we actually have the global level of interest in these type of technologies. And you can see here, globally, the interest is 1 in 5 in a fully autonomous vehicle. So that's all great to know, but I wanted to say a word about connectivity, because the desire that consumers have for connectivity doesn't end when they enter the vehicle. The same things that they want from their home, they want in the car. So this creates new opportunities. Obviously, they want to be able to have their phone and their digital products work, and they'd like to have cellular and broadband available in the car as part of their mobile Wi-Fi. And there are a lot of companies that are starting to do that. For 62% of auto intenders, they say this is a very important thing that they will consider as they purchase their next vehicle. The same thing for the smart home devices connected to the dashboard. They would like to be able to do things like control the lights in their home, control the security, control the temperature, the same things that they can do in the smart home right now. And over 50% tell us that that's going to be important in their next vehicle purchase. And 40% are interested in making in-vehicle purchases, kind of like using their car as a mobile wallet, if you will. So the benefits are clearly recognized in the automotive area, but there are some opportunities in execution, and the start-stop technology is a perfect example of that. For the auto intenders, 47% say they really appreciate it for the fuel efficiency, which is great. But at the same time, 65% say they find it unnerving. And this has a lot to do with getting used to it. The good news is that the automotive manufacturers have listened, and they're starting to offer the option to turn it on or off as consumers see fit. And we would encourage all the companies to take this into account and listen to your people and continue to iterate on your offerings as you go along. That's a very important thing to do. So I've hit the end of the automotive section now, and I'm going to hand it back to Kathy to talk about health technology.
So thinking about perceived benefits and perceived detriments, we're going to shift to the health category. And one of the trends that we've been studying, and we've been seeing this again, both in the United States as well as around the globe, is a focus on preventative health care. So 7 out of 10 American consumers say when they think about kind of their health philosophy, it's about prevention rather than treatment. And this is on the rise. It's on the rise here in the United States. It's on the rise globally. So when we think about health, the key driver is how do I prevent myself from getting sick? And certainly when we look at people who already are doing some type of health monitoring, wearing some type of wearable or using some other technology to monitor their health, overwhelmingly, the things that they are doing kind of fall in that preventative health maintenance. It's about, you're maintaining your physical condition, you're exercising, about getting the right nutrients, making sure you're following your diet. It's about watching and monitoring your sleep. So for sure, this idea of preventative care, detection, monitoring is something that is really driving this space in terms of why consumers are adopting these technologies. We think this is where the future is in continuing the notion of monitoring, tracking, and aligning that with preventative care, that messaging that through monitoring, tracking, we can prevent. So we did a little bit of a lean forward and looked at, the area of really highly personalized healthcare. So things where, you might have your DNA sequence and have a very personalized regimen, very customized regimen for you for your healthcare. And this is one of those areas where we're going to kind of hold up a little bit of a red flag to say that the consumer perception here is there's a little bit of pushback there. We see that 6 out of 10 Americans believe that DNA testing and the information that's provided is highly accurate. So there's trust and confidence in the results. But on the other hand, 65% say they are very worried about the security and privacy of DNA samples. So this is one of these areas where we see that, the consumer is reevaluating and thinking about some of these technologies. And we see this coming through in the pop culture as well. So we're going to share with you a very small clip from Conan, which I think does a really nice job of articulating and underscoring the data that we just shared with you about people's concerns about DNA testing.
I want to ask you about this. You tweeted this, a still. This is about Alexa. I think we have it. What's going on here? Did you buy Alexa?
No, I don't know why people would voluntarily bug your own house. Like, do you think you're the only one listening in on that? You never saw Weird Science, how creepy these nerds are? All these cameras on your phone, all of that. Do people go on Ancestry.com? Why would you send your saliva into the internet? Why would you do that? Why don't you just go to the Illuminati and help them build your robot replacement?
So, what he articulates clearly is a little bit of the evidence of the pushback there. So that's what we're seeing in health. I'm now going to pivot a little bit and talk about shopping, retail, and financial services, which overwhelmingly has been one of the categories where we have seen the benefits on the part of consumers really outweigh potential detriments in terms of product adoption. So if we think about how quickly and the really mainstreaming of certain activities such as online banking and online shopping, these are things that are beyond mainstream. The consumer is comfortable with them. In the United States, it's interesting that our adoption of mobile wallets is actually in many cases lower than other places around the world. There's a whole lot of reasons for this. Part is the availability, part is what's happening, kind of driven by the retailers. But we believe that the adoption of mobile wallets for sure is going to be something that we see increased adoption in the United States because we see it's already happened in other places around the world. This is one example where the U.S. is really lagging on the trend. So we don't see kind of the consumer resistance. I think some of the delay we've seen in our marketplace are due to a variety of factors. And we would anticipate to see growth in terms of mobile wallet usage moving forward. Karen already alluded to this. I mean, thinking about, the mobile wallet, thinking about, that wallet being other devices, such as your automobile. 4 out of 10 automotive intenders say they would be interested in being able to make in-vehicle purchases that are linked either to a bank or a credit card, and close to another 4 out of 10 are interested in voice-activated shopping within the car. So certainly we are open to new ways in which to pay for products and services. We did a little bit more of a lean forward and wanted to look at cryptocurrency in terms of, just different types of payment patterns. And what we see is that a relatively small number of Americans believe that cryptocurrency systems are secure. And when we think about the blockchain and the security that is built into cryptocurrency, it's interesting that this is such a low number. We think there probably is confusion out there because there is what's been happening kind of in speculation with investment in Bitcoin. Certainly that is contributing to this notion that the technology itself may not be secure. But this is one area where we think the opportunity is really around education of the marketplace, because overwhelmingly Americans tell us they've either never heard of cryptocurrency or they really don't understand what it's all about. So this to us represents an opportunity to educate the marketplace about the enhanced security and the technology and what it means for them.
Yeah. And so the cryptocurrency group are really the leading edge consumers. And I want to take an opportunity to give you a profile of the type of people who are actually embracing all of this technology. And you can see everything from the home to even working in the cloud computing and storing your photos and things like that. In the MRI data, it's a huge data set going back over 30 years, almost 40 years now. Actually, this is the 40th year, happy anniversary MRI. We created a Smart Lifer profile. And what we're able to do in this data set is see all the media behaviors, all the attitudes, their leisure activities, the things they do online, the things they do offline, and figure out who they are and how to reach them. So, how do we define a smart lifer for these purposes? We looked at all the smart home technologies that they could have, and even some of the smart car stuff, and we chose to use people who had 3 or more. And so for the smart lifers, 83% of them have some kind of advanced TV, whether that's a 4K Ultra HD TV, a smart TV, and that's at twice the level of the rest of America. We also looked at fitness trackers, and 62% of them have that. The smart home hubs, 58% have that. Smart watches, 47% have that. The smart home security systems are 38%, the smart thermometers, 36%, and the VR headsets, 17% have that. 8 times the American average. So these go from, 2 to 4 times to 8 times in terms of the technology that they own. And so we chose a little piece from pop culture, a little commercial that kind of brings to life what an extreme version of a smart lifer might look like, and we wanted to play it for you today.
Computer, order pizza.
Of course, Daniel.
Fridge, weather.
Clear skies near 75.
Trash can, turn on the TV.
My pleasure.
Ice dispenser, find me a dog soap. And make ice.
Pizza delivered.
What's happened to my son?
I think that's just what people are like now. I mean, with Progressive, you can quote your insurance on just about any device, even on social media. We'll be fine.
Willie?
I don't know.
Obviously, a clever, creative ad that brings to life what I think we all see coming is the idea that this will all be integrated and how it'll be used. And yes, the smart lifers do skew young, but they're not purely young. They're 6% of the US population right now, which is almost 16 million people in the US. Their median age is 40, and because they're younger, things are true about them. They have kids in their household, they're more likely to be married. Interesting that they're gender neutral. They're both men and women. They have higher household income, are professionals, and highly educated. So a great target. So how do you guys who have new technology to share with them reach them? Well, this is actually MRI's bread and butter. We can talk to you about all the different kinds of media that they are consuming right now. They're heavy magazine readers, heavy into the internet, which makes sense, medium on radio, and light on newspapers and television. So we delve into exactly where they go. The most popular magazines are popular in general. Some interesting notes on Relish and National Geographic. It's the top indexing magazines that really give you a feel for who they are. I mean, Yoga Journal and Shape, you get the sense they're physically active, and they are in their leisure activities. The New York Times and Psychology Today, they're actually readers. And then the frequent flyer magazines, they over-index for all of them because they're travelers. In terms of websites, they're going the places that the rest of America is going. They are definitely doing more online shopping than the rest of America. And the top indexing websites show that they're social, they're active, they're going out, again, travel with Airbnb. And their top TV stations show that they're sports fans, and we see in their attitudes that they're about to home renovate and they're really interested in renovating and remodeling their home, so HGTV pops to the top of networks for them. Their over-indexing networks give you the sense that they're fun and young, which is true. So, we also have a study at MRI about TV cord evolution. And when we looked at this profile in that, they still do have a TV cord because they're paying for all types of entertainment. But what we see is they're really investing in what they're watching. And by that, I mean they're paying for more streaming services than the rest of America. And they're investing time. They actually love to binge view, which means watching 3 or more shows in one sitting of the same program. And they like to wait until their shows are going to be renewed in order to start watching them in the binge way, and they like to watch a whole bunch together. So this is interesting because it creates a challenge for reaching them, at least in the TV atmosphere. A lot of the streaming services that they're using are not yet ad-enabled. So perhaps consider product placement to reach this smart lifer. And then we can really tell you what makes them tick. Of course they're into technology, but the attitudes that they were indexed for, I love to learn about it. It's one of my hobbies, technology and electronics, and they give more advice. They love to give advice about technology. They're also intellectual. I mentioned that they over-index for reading. They're in book clubs. They're museum goers. They themselves create films and video. They're into photography. And they're social. They over-index for going out to eat, entertaining at home, going to movies on opening weekend, and even going to nightclubs. So they're very active young people. They're also physically fit. We saw that Yoga Journal was at the top of their list, and they do over-index for leisure activities of yoga, as well as biking, jogging, running, and going to the gym. They're also more civically engaged than the rest of America. They vote often, they fundraise for organizations, they're members of church and civic groups, they even sign petitions. and they're collectors. They collect all types of things, from watches to stamps to video games to comic books to art and antiques. So they're really into the things that they love. When it comes to lifestyle and shopping behaviors, they are by far influencers, not just in the tech sphere, but across the board. When they find brands they like, they stick with it and they tell others about them. At the same time, they're also experimental because they say that they're often the first among their friends to try new things. And again, if they like it, they talk about it. They actually love to read and post reviews online, and they like to connect with brands via social media. And they love to shop. They say it's one of their favorite leisure activities. They enjoy going to the stores to see what's new. So even though they over-index for being online purchasers, they still do go to stores, which is a great way to reach them. And I mentioned they're brand loyal. They're also ad skeptical. So again, how you speak to them will be key. And just to give you a little taste of what else we have in MRI, I put here the World Traveler. So obviously they over-index for the frequent flyer magazines, but they also travel internationally 3 times more than the rest of America. And among their favorite brands, because we can look at all the brands, they enjoy imported beer, imported wine, and imported champagne. And the champagne brand that over-indexed for them was Perrier-Jouët. So let's have a drink. To focus on auto, since I know that's a great area for this particular conference, they are definitely auto techie. They look forward to learning about the new auto technologies that are available. 72% said that. Over 70% said they like to research and learn as much as they can before making a vehicle purchase. And they also tell others about that. When it comes to the style that they prefer, of course they're looking for the new technology, but they also believe that a vehicle is a badge. They agree with the statement, what kind of vehicle a person owns says a lot about who he or she is. They also like to personalize their vehicle, and they appreciate style that is bold and innovative. And they will spend to get the luxury appointments and options. So I told you who they are, but they're really just 6% of the total US population right now. So a great target for people who are making tech in the room. However, we have to sort of go to the next level of the concentric circle. And in the MRI data set, we can tell you what the next tech thing is out, and you can broaden your circle. But Kathy's now going to talk about what some of the concerns are as you go outside the smart lifers and get beyond the people who are most open.
So we've talked about smart technologies, and one of the things we've talked about is how relatively quickly these have gone beyond those leading edge consumers and mainstreams and become more mass market. And as we've been tracking smart technology adoption, we've seen that in the last few years, the barriers that were really barriers to purchase in the beginning, such as cost and product knowledge, have been greatly diminished. We've seen cost of many products go down. We've also seen that product knowledge as a barrier, so consumers not understanding the benefits of the technology, this has also gone down. So we would say these aren't necessarily barriers anymore to product adoption. But we have seen some barriers that have not gone away, and indeed they're starting to increase. And those are barriers around security and privacy. And we've talked about security in a few different areas. We talked about home security. Karen talked about the automotive security. We talked about cryptocurrency. Security and privacy continue to be barriers to product adoption. And indeed, privacy is now the #1 barrier for the adoption of digital home systems in the United States. So we began this presentation by talking about opportunities and barriers. These are barriers that are still with us and haven't necessarily gone away. And I think we are really at an inflection point in terms of how the consumer is thinking about technology today. We see that 37% of global consumers are reporting to us that it is important to take a break from technology in order to maintain their overall health. So there is this, we're in a period, I think, of reassessment and reevaluation about the benefits of technology. And we're already seeing developments in this space. So for example, we have here on the bottom left is the idea of going gray on your phone. If you're not familiar with that, that's, you know, essentially putting your phone in black and white mode. It looks like a black and white TV. And by doing so, it's supposed to, you won't get, see the vivid colors, the red badges on your text, your emails. So your brain doesn't get that shot of dopamine in terms of a reaction to your device. We're seeing devices also implement more things around monitoring your screen time, giving you control, and really trying to empower the consumer so they feel and have more control over how they're using these devices. We're also seeing that this notion of people need to reach me wherever I am, which was really going up and up through, you know, the early part of this decade. So that idea of I have to be connected all the time, we're starting to see slippage in that. And people are saying, you know what, now it's still important that people can reach me, but it isn't this paramount driver. And I think it's really interesting that that statement is on the decrease globally, but it's also on the decrease when we look at the youngest consumers in our study. So those between the ages of 18 and 24. So those truly digital natives, they are less likely than they were in 2013 to agree with the statement that I feel disconnected if I can't get on the internet. They are less likely to agree with the statement it's important to be reachable wherever I am. And less likely to say, you know what, I have to be connected at all times. So we're seeing a little bit of a pushback on the part of technology here, and it is being, we're seeing it really across different demographic segments. And we see it in the United States as well, this agreement with the statement that, you know what, too much technology can be a bad thing. 7 out of 10 Americans agree with the statement, and this has gone up 12 points in the last decade. So there is, again, this reevaluation of what technology means to us and what the benefits are. And thinking about AI, I know a lot of people are going to be talking about AI this week. This is another area where consumers are voicing skepticism. 58% of Americans say they're skeptical of whether technology can be trusted to do everything it's supposed to. And 6 out of 10 Americans say that with AI comes the ability for good, but it also comes with inherent risks. So there is, I think, an increasing sensitivity, and again, that notion of reevaluation of the benefits and potential detriments around technology. And I think when we look back at 2018, as I said before, is going to be one of those pivotal years in terms of this reassessment. There were a lot of very public events that, you know, got people thinking about security and privacy and their digital footprint. And now 8 out of 10 Americans say they are concerned about their social media footprint. So what information is out there about them? So we're seeing this become more top of mind for many consumers. And indeed, we are tracking people's concerns about personal information getting into the wrong hands. And I think this is pretty much we're at the beginning of this trend. So 17% of global consumers say that this is something they're concerned about. Just to give you a little context, we asked this within a battery of other types of concerns, such as inflation and high prices, the threat of recession, the threat of terrorism, global climate change. So it is relatively kind of a lower level concern that people have. But I think what is important to point out is this trend line, that this has been going up pretty steadily and significantly over the last decade. And we would anticipate that this becomes more of a concern that people have, just given what we're seeing in terms of this reevaluation of technology and thinking about our information and our digital footprints. And it's really across all areas. So in our auto mobility study, we see that 3/4 of auto intenders are concerned about their car being hacked. So it is not just about social media usage, it gets into all the smart devices we've already talked about. And I guess we really like comedians here because we have our last example is from John Oliver, and I think again this is just another reference to the concerns that many people are feeling.
Lots of things have computers in them now, even cars. And last year, 2 hackers showed a writer from Wired how they could disable his car on the interstate.
Do it. Kill the engine. So we're killing the engine right now. Actually, accelerate.
I turned on my hazard lights, but I was still stuck in the right lane with no shoulder to escape onto.
Nice. I'm stuck on the highway. I think he's panicking.
Yeah, no shit is panicking. You killed his engine on the freeway. Those hackers seem like they've played so many video games they've forgotten that cars are actual objects carrying living people.
So certainly some concerns there. And so thinking about these security concerns, one of the other things that we have been tracking is right now we're in a period of tech reevaluation. We are also in a period where there's tremendous trust erosion on the part of consumers. We are increasingly feeling distrustful of large institutions, of governments, of businesses, of religious organizations. So there really is a trust deficit out there. And we're seeing it across many different categories. This is from our automobility study, so it looks at the automotive category, and you see the number of people who say they have trust in brands in this space has had a steady decline over the last 6 years. This decline is evident in a lot of other categories as well. So people are, increasingly skeptical and are in an environment where trust is eroding. And I think what is really interesting about this is not necessarily good news if you're a brand, but the flip side of this is that trust is something that people are seeking ever more than they have in the past. So on one hand, we have trust being eroded, and on the other hand, when we ask people about the brands that they're engaging with, they're saying, I'm only buying products and services from brands I trust. Again, this is a global number, so this is for people all around the world. And what you see is that trust is even more important to consumers today. So we think this represents an opportunity in this widening gap. So you have a gap of trust being more important, yet trust being eroded. How can you, as a brand, as a category, as an industry, kind of bring those back into alignment? We think there's a really potential interesting opportunity there as well. So Karen and I want to start by summing up some of the, a lot of today's presentation, we've been talking about the consumer view. What are the benefits versus the potential detriments of different types of technology? So we want to sum up in some of the areas where the benefits outweigh the concerns. And the way in which we did this, we asked consumers about a lot of different technologies. And we asked them to say, literally, where is the benefit and where is the detriment or their concern? And we see there's a lot of things where, for sure, the benefits are really, really strong. So some of these are things that have been around for a long time. We already talked about them a little bit, things like online shopping and online banking. These are things that have wide acceptance. And the driver of why people say the good outweighs the bad of these technologies is that they're really around convenience, they're really around ease of use. And if you remember at the beginning of the presentation, we shared with you the statistic that, if a product is too complex, I quickly lose interest. Playing in that space of ease and convenience, we see all of these product examples really speak to convenience and have very high perceived benefits on the part of consumers. We also see that areas where there are high perceived benefits are around savings. This can be related to energy efficiency, it can be related to cost savings, safety. We talked a lot about security and safety. This is another area where if the safety is communicated effectively to the consumer, they see the good outweighing the bad. And then also fun, entertainment. We haven't talked too much about entertainment, but for sure, that's an area where the good outweighs the bad. The potential red flags right now are where people are feeling that things are either unsafe or they're just kind of making them feel kind of creepy and uneasy. And this is the areas that we want to point out to think about in terms of, if you're in this space, how can we better manage our product portfolio to address that the concerns consumers have? If it is a education or a lack of knowledge about a product or technology, how can you communicate that effectively? So for sure, we see things that threaten people's privacy and digital security we're becoming increasingly uneasy about that. And we're uneasy about things that could potentially be unsafe. And we talked about cryptocurrency. That's, I think, one of the examples where, right now the consumer thinks they're unsafe, but there's also a product knowledge barrier there. So I think these are important to keep in mind when we're thinking about the future.
Yep. So I'm going to sum up. This is our last official slide, some of the key takeaways. I mean, clearly from everything we've said today, consumers have a feeling of strong trust in a lot of the technologies. But there are certain technologies where they're feeling kind of ambivalent, and there are clearly some technologies where they're feeling very skeptical. So understanding where you, as a category, as a brand, sit in this continuum will be very critical for market success. So to summarize a couple of the areas that we touched on today, when it comes to home, safety has been an important driver, but the opportunity lies perhaps in moving into the detection area and really increasing the functionality offerings in that way. For automotive, we talked about the top 3 important drivers have been safety, the connected vehicle, and infotainment. For the newer emerging ones, it will be essential to communicate the benefits in a relevant way to auto people's lives and in a trusting manner to help fix some of that eroding trust. When it comes to health, the opportunities will be about extending the functionality, if you will, to add in some of the new detection areas and really focus on prevention. Because when you focus on prevention, you'll be giving a true new benefit that will draw more people into the acceptance. And for finance, a lack of knowledge is really giving people a shaky feeling. So understanding that security is paramount, we have to ensure that the security is actually there and that we're clearly communicating it. So overall, if I had to summarize how all of us should be thinking about technology today, as we're considering our relationship with our potential customers, it's important to recast it in our minds to be a true give to get, where we're actually giving the benefits and we're clearly communicating it and we're recognizing that we're getting data back because the consumers are starting to be aware of this more and more. So with that, that's the end. We're just going to put up the final slide to tell you about the sources that we pulled the data from, and we encourage you to ask some questions. So I should say, there are 2 mics set up, and the group has asked us if you want to ask a question, go to either mic, and we will bounce back and forth between the 2. Oh, that's right. Is this something you guys already knew, or did we give you something new? You knew it? You didn't know it. Okay, so somebody in the front, thank you. Okay, let me ask you guys a question. What do you want to know next? Because the company GfK is going to continue to look at issues of technology and trust. What's on your mind? Go to the microphone and tell us that. Go for it.
Hi, we've talked a lot so far about millennials and boomers and that kind of stuff. What is being done for more senior people to make technology easy to use, provide more safety and independence at home?
That's a great question. We were talking earlier today about how the older generation is actually often the ones with the most disposable income, so they are a ripe area for the technology companies to focus on. And I like what you're saying about making it easier to get into it. We haven't been tracking that attitude in MRI, but we can certainly add it.
Yeah. Well, I think when we look at, for example, health, and there you are who asked the question. That preventative care, right, that's something we can look at by an older population, and I think there's tremendous opportunities in terms of ease of use in the healthcare arena. When you think about autonomous vehicles, There's tremendous opportunity there for people who might have limited mobility or may not be able to drive anymore. So I think in some ways, a lot of the focus on younger consumers in this space is missing a really, really big opportunity for an older population. And I know that there's going to be a lot, when the floor opens tomorrow, I know in the health space, a lot of the technology that we're seeing previewed is going to be around, I've seen quite a bit around preventative healthcare measures and, things like helping, either monitor, diagnose, remind people to take pills and all of those things. So I think there's tremendous opportunity for older population. And when we look particularly at some of other markets around around the globe, so take, for example, a market like Japan, which is a much older market than what we're seeing in the US, and a market like South Korea, I think there are really big opportunities in terms of maintaining independence and health with an older population that are still untapped.
This is my first conference, and so the enormity of this is kind of overwhelming. What is the best venue for that sort of thing that you're talking about? The health side.
Yeah, there's I don't have the book, but there's a whole pavilion. I think it's at the area, but it's all around health.
It's at the Venetian Sands. It's the Digital Health Summit.
Yeah, it's at the Venetian Sands. So, and people who've been here one time or 20 times find this conference overwhelming, so you are not alone. Yes.
Just to ask a little bit, another question about the health side. You talked a little bit about detection, you talked a little bit about monitoring, but there seems to be another layer in that where we're starting to see some of the technology that can actually produce advice and tell people what to do next, either in terms of intervening if they're having a food episode, or maybe how to keep themselves healthy in terms of like what to eat, what to drink, how much to exercise faster, that kind of thing. Do you have any idea about, getting back to the trust idea, how consumers are willing to trust technology to give them advice that they can do for maintenance or behavior change?
Yes.
Versus just the sort of, monitoring your blood pressure type thing.
Right. We think the opportunity in coaching, which is all the examples you kind of gave, I put under the bucket of coaching, is if you were at our presentation last year, we talked a little bit about that as an opportunity area, and I still maintain it's an opportunity area because people, if you remember that slide that we shared with you about the DNA, people really do trust the results. So there's not skepticism in that, this is telling me I should be doing something healthfully. We're not distrustful of that. Where we see the potential kind of danger is related to privacy and security. So if you're coaching me, but then you are going back to my doctor and saying, I should be doing 10,000 steps, I'm only doing 5,000, and then this goes back to my health insurance company, that's where I think that's where the danger is. And on one of the slides we shared at the beginning, which I neglected to point out, one of the areas where we talked about growth in smart home technologies, one of the areas that has grown the least is in reporting back your health data to a healthcare provider. That has only grown by, I think, 1 percentage point, so statistically insignificant, between 2015 and 2018. So we're not seeing the level of uptick in that space as we are in things like, posing a question to a voice assistant. So I think that is one area where the coaching is trusted and the benefit is certainly there for the consumer, but to the point Karen wrapped up with, it has to be done in a way that the consumer feels confident about the security of their information.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm curious, out of all of these trends that you've presented, what surprised you the most in terms of how fast it moved compared to what you originally thought when you picked up on the trend?
That was a good question. Yeah, that's a great question. There were so many places in the consumer life data where the jump had been significant in just a few years' time. It's hard to pick just one. I think we need to discuss it over drinks.
But, this isn't exactly an answer to your question, but I'll throw it out there anyway. I mean, when you think, if you just do kind of the trend lines and you look at how quickly voice adoption has been compared to, other types of technology, certainly that is, cycles are getting smaller and smaller, and you totally see it with voice in terms of how quickly that's.
Yeah, you're right, and that'll be the overarching one regardless of what type of technology. That's the other thing which we didn't really say. I mean, voice plays in every arena of technology right now, and we expect it to play even more so. Like, you could literally ask for your, what workout should I be doing, and it's gonna tell you. But it's gonna be tied to another piece of tech, so probably voice is gonna be the overall, winner, if there is a winner, there's no such thing. So. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, we have to bounce to the back to be fair, and then we'll come back to you.
You mentioned some channels in which the smart lifers are receptive to new technologies. You also showed the erosion of trust. So the real question is, what are some of the methodologies that you have researched in terms of how the message can be delivered to create more trust or to create more of a message of security or other benefits of the technology you want to introduce? Namely, it could be a type of storytelling, it could be a type of introduction, or to gain greater understanding of what you're trying to present.
Yes, I have an answer, and then you probably have one too. So actually, I was just working with a colleague at GfK who works on the AdFit Optimizer that actually looks at what the messaging should be for any particular target and product. And then we were talking about marrying that data with the MRI media data so that you would get the answer to what should the message be and where do you place it. And it would obviously vary greatly by each different type of technology and category. I'm sure you have a thought as well.
So, my thought on that is like going back to kind of the macro view and the importance of authenticity in communication. And we had Karen and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. I think one of the biggest white spaces in clear terms and conditions, right? Because people are going to start reading them, and they're really, really hard for people to figure out. And I think having a authentic and clear and easily understood message is also really important. So if you're on the product side.
And it's an opportunity to build trust with the brand that is completely missed right now.
One of the things that have been touted as trustful, and certainly the influencer channel has not delivered that as well. So is that something to avoid, or other ideas?
I think the influencer channel, it has to be done the right way, right? So yeah, I mean, there have been influencers we've seen that they haven't been as transparent in terms of what they're communicating, and to that brand or that influencer's detriment. But I still think the importance of word of mouth and communication from someone is super important, particularly in this environment where I said there's a trust erosion, right? So I think, a lot of what you spoke to are some of the tactical missteps that have happened with some influential marketing that certainly kind of, I think, put a little bit of a black eye on that whole strategy. But I think that one-to-one or one-to-many kind of authentic communication is more important than it ever has been.
Well, thank you guys.
Oh, we have one more question.
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
One little one. I was wondering what about voice in other languages and emerging markets where the connected arena is not so ubiquitous. So emerging markets and all the voices.
Are you talking about emerging markets literacy rates with voice?
How do you see voice implementing technology on emerging markets and other languages that is not English?
Yeah.
So where the arena is not so connected.
Right. Well, certainly, and I think one of the slides we shared in the beginning is just like a lot of other new technologies, particularly the smartphone, we've seen technology leapfrog in some of the emerging markets. And, voice, I think, potentially can be one of those technologies as well. Use of voice is actually higher in some of the emerging markets than it is in some of the more developed markets. So I think, getting back to the ease of use of voice, I mean, there's really, thinking of that idea of simplicity, and there's nothing more simple than just having a voice command and posing a voice question. I think it has potential, and we're seeing potential already in markets outside of the developed economies. So we're right at time. So thank you guys. Thank you.